Welcome to Happy Path Programming. I'm Bruce Eckel.
I'm James Ward.
So, welcome everyone to another episode of Happy Path Programming. This week we're talking to Dave Thomas, who is probably most famous for co-authoring The Pragmatic Programmer, but he's done tons. He's been in the industry for a long time and done all kinds of other things.
Been a guiding light for many
A guiding
people.
light. He was one of the Agile Manifesto people. The thing that I chose not to go to because nobody was paying my airline ticket, and
What a mistake.
I know it was. I maybe not. That could have been a rabbit hole that. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway,
hard to know if that was a good or a bad decision.
Before we get started, want to announce that we have. So the Winter Tech Forum is happening the week of March 3rd, and we are doing it at the Crested Butte Center for the Arts, which is a gorgeous building.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Really nice, and a lot of good views from it, and a lot of nice rooms.
It's going to be a fun new venue for us.
It is a great venue, and I hope to continue doing it. We're also looking into creating a nonprofit organization. Not sure if that'll happen, but going to explore that.
Maybe one of the sessions is.
Oh, well,
a nonprofit
could be.
Yeah. Winter Tech
yes, hook people onto the board of directors.
WTF Inc.
Yes.
So wait, no, it couldn't be Inc.
Yeah.
Nonprofit.
So before we started recording, we were about to talk about our, I guess the language.
Wait.
What?
Winter Tech Forum. Where can people find more information on Winter Tech Forum?
WinterTechForum.com.
Easy.
And it'll be open for registration, hopefully by the time you hear this podcast.
Great.
So everything
is to beautiful Crested Butte. We'll go skiing, and
we'll do outdoor things. We'll do, and this is all discussions. So it's basically discussions and hacking and lightning talks and
a week of fun.
A week of fun. Afternoons are open for either forming your own workshops or going out into the snow. We have a progressive dinner. We have a banquet. We have all kinds of, basically it's just a continuous kind of hangout session.
Great.
And it's great. We've been doing it for close to 25 years, I think. Well, not exactly this. And before that, there were some things. So we've been doing it for quite a while.
So it's going to be great.
Right.
Okay, Dave, so we have a question for you.
Yeah.
In the world of programming, what brings you joy?
Yeah.
What brings me joy is, excuse me.
we all got the winter
cold.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but what brings me joy? What brings me joy is, I guess, realizing an idea, as in delivering something or creating something. Ideally, that has a little bit of a twist to it. So it's kind of, if it's just straightforward, then it's boring and there's no challenge and it's no particular pleasant surprise when it works. So it's when
coming up with the idea and then problem solving to the solution, or
and it's actually not necessarily the idea as much as coming up with the need. I think the need is the driver for me. I very rarely do something the first time and say, okay, it's done. Unless I'm doing it in some kind of environment where that's the right thing to do. But when I'm working for myself, then I enjoy exploring. I'm a hopeless explorer. And so I will come up with a need and then say, okay, so how am I going to solve that need? And at that point, I will disappear down a whole number of rabbit holes, sometimes in parallel, sometimes serial. And at some point, one of those explorations will make me smile, and it'll make me think, okay, that's probably the way it was meant to be done. I can't really say. It's what the old Hillside folks used to call the quality without a name from Alexander. It was just like, that feels right. And there's a big satisfaction in doing that exploration and feeling like I've actually gone somewhere that I haven't been before.
Hmm.
I feel like I know. I mean,
That
that's the resonates for sure.
Yeah.
That's kind of I
Well, what a unique place we are as developers to be able to do that at the pace and agility and no other realm that I know of can you have that satisfaction in that way.
Have you read Mythical Man Month recently?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I guess the last time I read it was it might have been 10 years ago or something. But
it's worth reading the introduction of that, because Brooks was writing in an age where computer programming was not in the public mind that much. And so he felt the need to explain what programmers were and what they did. And he has a list of, I can't remember, 5 things that kind of make a programmer. But the one that resonated the most with me was, he said, programmers are like poets, building out of pure imagination, constructing castles in the sky, etc., etc.
Mhm.
And that, I think, expresses it in its purest form. We are one of the few industries, I think we're probably the only industry, where you create from nothing.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I think recently I've realized, it's my hobby. It's the thing, because I keep looking for video games to play and stuff like that, but they just don't. They're not as
Nothing brings
interesting
you
as
joy
programming.
like
No,
programming.
no.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is that uniqueness you're talking about. So yeah, I don't know. It's just very satisfying.
Yeah, and the journey, I think
Yeah.
Dave was saying about being able to so quickly go from this place of unknowns and despair and who knows if I'm actually gonna be able to solve this need
Mhm.
to pretty quickly usually getting to oh my God, this
Yeah.
is amazing and beautiful and I love it.
Yeah, you wake up one morning and you go, I think I see.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes
Yeah.
it's right.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
you know
imagine
what? I
if you're
think,
like a sculptor,
Yeah.
that you could maybe have some of those same feelings,
Mhm.
but the process is much longer.
and also the cost of mistakes
Yeah.
are somewhat higher.
Uh-huh.
But one of the other interesting things to me about that whole concept is that I think one of the things that distinguishes I was going to say a good programmer, but I don't mean that. I think someone who was meant to program, if that makes sense, is the acceptance of the fact that you're right way more, you're wrong way more than you're right. And not despairing, when you get to the end of the 15th experiment and it's still not the way you want it to be. I think that almost all good developers have that kind of resiliency. They don't view failure as failure. They view failure as, hey, I just learned something. I mean, I know that sounds very noble. And in reality, I get frustrated and everything else too. But
sometimes
in
want
the
to throw
long
the
term,
computer out the window.
Yeah. But I also have come to learn that, that old thing about it's darkest before the dawn is that typically, if I stick with it, it gets worse and worse and worse. And then suddenly, the clouds part and there's a solution.
I just had that experience in the last couple months. Yeah.
What you're working on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's such a good feeling.
Mhm.
I mean, it doesn't feel good when you're in the depth of despair.
Well,
but
I
if
had
you
the
emerge, it
AI at
feels
my
really good.
side to help me explore these avenues. And so I kept running into walls, but then I kept coming up with a new idea, and then it would kind of help me get there faster. And so that made a big difference. So yeah, that was one of our discussions with. I mean, you've been around like me long enough to have seen a lot of, oh no, a thing is coming and it's gonna disrupt everything, and that's of course the latest thing with AI, and people are going, oh, we're gonna lose all of our jobs with AI, but you probably remember like when compilers were coming in and all the assembly language programmers were going, oh
Right.
no, we're gonna lose our jobs because of this new tool.
Yep, and IDE is the same. And code generation, the same. And there was a whole bunch of... the only one which actually did happen, and I don't think anybody anticipated, was spreadsheets.
Ooh, yes. The world runs on spreadsheets.
Because that was such a business-oriented thing that, most of the programmers didn't occur to them. It was like, but here's a model that makes sense to the people who are actually paying for all this stuff.
Right. Yeah. If it wasn't for spreadsheets, there'd probably be twice as many programmers as there are now. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you have a need for some managing some business data. You get some developers to build some custom application for you. But at the same time, I don't think we need to be very careful not to fall into the buggy whip trap here. I think that there will be a need for people to guide the process, whether those people are the current type of programmer. I don't know. I think the reality with AI is that we are about to experience a rapid descent into despondency, because I think we've clearly passed peak AI right now, and people are beginning to reap that harvest. The people that laid off a whole bunch of junior or mid-level developers are suddenly going to realize that they have nobody to fill the gaps. And the people who have said, hey, I'm going to have AI write the code, but don't worry, because I've also got AI writing the tests, are about to discover that that logic doesn't work.
Have you tried that? Have you seen how that works?
So, So I it's the same as everything, right? When you're in an industry that moves as fast as us, you have to learn to be flexible, and you have to spend time of your own time exploring, and finding out what's out there. Yeah, and that's why it's really important, I think, not to say, okay, I'm going to learn a new language. I'm a Java programmer, so I'm going to learn Kotlin, or I'm going to learn, Swift or whatever, right? It should be, I'm a Java programmer, I'm going to learn Haskell or something totally outside the realm of where you're comfortable, because that, even if you never write a line of Haskell or whatever, or Camel or something in your life, that flexibility that you've learned will pay itself back many times over. And when we're living in a time that's changing as quickly as this, you need to get in a position where you can rock and roll with the best of them,
Yeah, and it takes work to gain that flexibility. It's like you got to go to yoga to.
Well, yeah, but it's also like there are paradigms, right? And if what you learn is yet one more C++ inspired language, then all you're learning is classes and subclasses and blah, 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 right? And you're not actually adding dramatically to your core understanding of what's going on.
It's not giving you a totally different perspective. And
Correct.
That's where a lot of the kind of growth for me has been. In being able to see things from a completely different perspective than what I was used to.
Well, and then what you bring back to whatever language you're using, it changes your programming completely. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You, at one point, you programmed in Smalltalk, or is that right?
No, that was the other Dave Thomas. Yes, I have written some Smalltalk, but not a lot.
Okay.
I'll be honest with you. Sorry.
Ruby. You've used Ruby a lot.
Yeah.
That's your happy path. That's your happy place language. Right?
That is my my workhorse. Okay. I keep trying other languages. I am not exactly a faithful adherent, but I try them, and I tend to come back because for me, we're talking about being able to whip things out quickly and then experiment and everything else. I find that Ruby gives me that flexibility most of the time. And so that's where I if I need to whip something up quickly, I'll tend to do it in Ruby. But I got to tell you, you're talking about bringing things back from other languages. Every time I stray, I'm tending to stray into the functional world. And I have been for the last 5-10 years. And I stopped sometime last year. I stopped to look at what I was doing because I was also writing a fair amount of Ruby just for our the Pragmatic Bookshelf online stuff. And I realized that I was not using classes anymore.
That's what I wanted to ask.
That's
That
first on
was
your
like
list.
my first question, because you mentioned that in the Pragmatic Programmer as well. It's like, oh, well, in particular, inheritance, I think, right?
Inheritance is the spawn of the devil. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I wanted your well, one of my questions was like, oh yeah, expand on that, because I've had this, I've just discovered that, oh, I'm creating types for sure,
Uh-huh.
a lot, but the the thought of inheriting anything has just pretty much left my consciousness. It's like, and I turn back and I go, oh, that's right, inheritance, that was a thing, but why? So yeah, that's what I want to hear. Your talk about that, please.
So I guess it all comes down in the end to what is a class. And I got to tell you, I was like the poster child for OO programming for the longest time. I mean, I first wrote an object-oriented program in 1974, I think. Yeah, I've got a year.
Was that in Simula?
Simula, yeah.
Okay.
And I have been an OO. I mean, there have been periods where I haven't. I just spent a lot of time writing C and assembler. But probably from the mid-'80s on, if there was an OO language available, I would use it. And I gave a whole bunch of talks later on about how object orientation was the way to think of the world, and all that bullshit about modeling.
Isn't it embarrassing though?
It is.
I did
it
the
is.
same thing, and it's like,
right.
I'm going cringe.
Yeah. But to my credit, I was at the time also saying don't use inheritance because. And my challenge to the audience would always be, okay, if you want to use inheritance, just give me one example, one real-world example of an ISA relationship. And nobody ever came up with something that was actually any good, right? So I said, okay, so if you assume the inheritance is an ISA relationship and you cannot think of a real-world example, why? And you consider objects as modeling the real world, then there's a disconnect here, right? But the fundamental disconnect is that I've come to the conclusion that people are not doing object-oriented programming anymore. They're doing class-oriented programming. And that is a fundamental mistake because you lose. Okay, so I am very firmly in the Simula school and not the Smalltalk school and not the Simula school. So I view an object as being an actor, as being a self-contained chunk, manages its own state, and you can only talk to it through a well-defined interface. And there is no need for classes in that model. They're just factories. But instead, we've come to use or to rely on the C++, Java model of a class is the fundamental design unit of software. Right. So back in the days when we were using UML, the most popular diagram was the class diagram. Yeah. And so people were taught that classes are the way to think of the world, classes are the way to model the world. And then you run into this problem. Well, okay, if a class is modeling the world, how do I represent the fact that a car and a bicycle both have wheels? Oh, well, I mean, it's supposed to be somehow some kind of type-based system. So therefore, they must be related. So therefore, I can't sensibly say a car is a kind of bicycle, and I can't sensibly say a bicycle is a kind of car. So I'm going to have to invent vehicle, and I'll have that. Okay, and the only reason I'm having that is because I want to share this trait of having wheels. And then you come up with a boat and say, okay, is a boat a vehicle? And you go, well, yeah, because it can carry passengers, as can a car, as can a bicycle. But, it doesn't have wheels. What do I do about that? And you either then dive into multiple inheritance or you start adding all these stupid flags and stuff to your objects. And people tend to do the latter because most languages now don't support multiple inheritance. And as a result, their classes are no longer classes. Their objects are no longer objects. Each one has got so many individual traits and concerns, it's just pointless, So inheritance from that way is a big mistake. But the other part of inheritance that's wrong is the assumption that types form a hierarchy, because they don't, right? People love hierarchies. Victorian scientists who classified butterflies loved hierarchies. But the reality is the world is not hierarchical, and your code is not hierarchical, And so trying to build everything with object at the root is absolutely pointless. So
I understand this now, and it makes sense when you explain it to me, but in the, over the years, I was just going, this doesn't seem to fit. I must be doing it wrong. I must not understand, because, there's all these people saying, no, the OO paradigm works marvelously, and I must just not be getting it right.
Yeah. And I think that was me. And as I say, I think exposure to a lot of functional programming led me to understand that the entire premise of objects and classes is the wrong way around, right? The premise of a class is I want to encapsulate state and maintain state and provide all of the functions that work on that state, okay? The premise of functional programming is I want to transform state. And of the two, which gets something done, So my programming is now the only time I use classes, and I do use classes, is when I need to genuinely encapsulate and perform some very basic operations on state. So, for example, validation, converting it into some external form. That's about it, not much else. And if possible, I will make each of those classes generate read-only objects. And then all the rest of my code is external functions. And I namespace it not according to the class it uses, but according to what it does. And so I can actually have multiple namespaces that work on multiple classes.
Yeah, this function transforms from this.
Correct.
Thing,
yeah.
this other thing.
Yeah. I have a theory that I've never managed to get past the idea of, this is a cool theory. There is a reducer, right, takes an input and a state and produces a new state. So take a reducer and add one extra output to it. So a reducer takes a state and an input and produces a new state and an output. So I don't know what you call it, super reducer, right? I think that is the fundamental operation of computing. And I know you guys are into effects. That is effectively what an effect is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I think you can take it out of the realm of just effects, effects are kind of like a workaround for something that's hard to do. And actually, I find that I use that structure, that pattern, whatever you want to call it. I was trying really hard not to use the word pattern.
Yeah.
But I find I use that almost all the time right now, because it seems to be the unit of computation that both gets stuff done and is automatically composable. And if you're in the right language, is type safe.
Yeah. Is that a monad?
It's here's the thing. Yeah, it almost is, and it depends to some extent on how your state is handled.
Yeah.
Right. If the state is handled, what's the word I'm looking for? Internally, transparently, behind the scenes, like an effect.
Yeah.
Then effectively, it does the same work as a monad does.
Oh.
Although it's not as algebraically constrained as a monad. But yeah, it does that kind of work. But I mean, the whole point there is that monads are also a hack, right? All of this work is to do with the fact that functional programs are really, really nice, but they don't do anything, And so we have to find a way of
Fix.
getting it to do something without embarrassing ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So here's another thing that I've struggled with for a while, which is the Liskov substitution principle.
Oh, yeah.
Because it doesn't seem to work with statically compiled languages. It seems like it's more for, say, a language like Smalltalk or perhaps Ruby.
Okay, but ask yourself, why are you using LSP? All right. Well, sorry, no. Under what circumstances are you cognizant of LSP?
Well, it also seems like you have to know ahead of time.
There's that, but I mean, you can recognize it when you've broken it. You can recognize the fact and then go back and fix it.
Yeah.
But you do that whenever you're talking about method chains, right? Right. The fundamental thing of Liskov is that I need to make sure I'm directly talking to whatever it is I want to talk to. And if you don't do method chains, and if instead you do pipelines, it doesn't matter anymore.
Mm.
Yeah. And that is one of my biggest gripes with Ruby, is that it does not have a pipeline operator. And that is the one thing that keeps not driving me away, but keeping me looking for an alternative. Because having spent some time writing Elixir, it is such a beautiful construct for expressing composable code without having to have objects as a level of composition.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so, so beautiful.
I'm not very familiar with Elixir, but I think this would be similar to Haskell's do notation or Scala's for comprehension. Is that?
Yeah, it's actually Haskell has it's not the same as do, because do is effectively is method chaining underneath the hood, right? They actually rewrite do's into a method chain, whereas the pipeline is not. All a pipeline does is it takes the value on the left and injects it as the first parameter to the call on the right.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a pure transformational thing. I believe Scala has one. I'm pretty sure Clojure has one. TypeScript will have one. F# has one. Most functional languages have it.
Yeah, I think I've seen it in Elm.
Yeah. And the thing about it is, it feels funny at first, because if you've been doing OO all the time, which I had, it kind of feels like a little bit fast and loose, But after a while, you get to realize that, no, you can actually have totally type-safe pipelines, and they can actually, they are so much more composable than functions are or classes are. And one of the cool things with pipelines is you can actually compose pipelines, right? Because a pipeline at a macro level is an input and an output with a transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I have another.
Bruce has a list of questions.
I have a list of questions that I composed. Well, I composed as I was reading the pragmatic program.
Well, you know what? That's better than having one that you inherited.
Yeah.
True. Yes, prefer composition to inheritance. So I think you were part of the Agile Manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
You went to what was it in Salt Lake City?
Snowbird. It was Snowbird, yeah.
Right, yeah. I remember getting invited to that, but then I was just, I wish I had gone, but I wasn't used to paying my own way at that time.
Oh, I know that feeling, yeah.
Yes. And then realizing later you missed out. So you had some interesting commentary about Agile. Do you have an alternative that you?
Where are you at on the process?
Yes,
side
where are
of
you
things?
at? Yeah.
Okay. So the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, to my mind, the only worthwhile, I don't say it that way. The most valuable part of that is the first page. And the first page sets out 4 values, and they are wide open, and lots of interpretation is allowed. It doesn't matter. And the values are not rules. They are simply, we prefer this to that. You know?
It's almost like the Zen of Python, but laying out like here's the things that we value, and
Right.
that's the important piece.
And okay, so there are two aspects to it, I think, which made that a good document. First of all, it said we value. It didn't say you should value. It said the 17 of us have been writing software a while, and we have come to value this. And it also was not absolute. It didn't say don't write documentation. It didn't say don't have contracts. It just says, in an ideal world, maybe you should think about this rather than that, working code over contracts. So that part of it I am really, really proud of, because it is not a process. It's a value system. And the reason that's important, I think, is because there is no one process that will work, right? People keep looking for it, and they've been looking for it since 1980, right?
The universal process.
The universal process, right? And it's my tool is better than your tool or whatever else it might be. And the reality is that we don't know enough about software development
and it
to be able to even
so many things.
Yeah, but we haven't got any concept of the scope and the environment in which software is developed, And until we do that, the idea of
people
looking
who
for
are developing it.
Oh, the psychology, yeah.
No, but also the politics of the company, right? The personality of the team members, the quirks of the tooling. There are thousands and thousands of intangible factors that go into every project. And thinking that you can, create a wall chart that says this is how we do it, right, is the ultimate hubris. And it's just plain wrong, right? So that's where the manifesto shone, I thought, because it doesn't say this is how you should do it. It was more a meta level. This is how you should think about how you do it, But that's not what people wanted, right? People wanted they wanted to be told what to do, because it's a lot harder to have to think for yourself. And so there were early teams who were enthusiastic, and they did do the work, and I met quite a few of them in like the 2004, 2005 time, and they were incredibly successful. Most of them were following some variant of XP that they'd kind of done for themselves, and it was working great. But for the vast majority of people, it was, so my boss is telling me I shouldn't write documentation anymore, and then we'll be agile. And then what got worse is that gap in the gap between people felt they should do agile and didn't know how to do agile was very quickly filled by commercial consultants and commercial processes, I guess, which said, don't worry, we will give you 15 ring binders, and if you read them all and follow them all, then you'll be agile, right? And from a company point of view, right, some VP somewhere was tasked with making software agile, and if I spend $2 million and get the ring binders, then I've done my job, move on to the next one, And so my strong belief is that in those, 20-something years, agile has gone from being a incredibly powerful thing, which has permanently changed the industry. I mean, I think before the manifesto, testing was at best an afterthought. And I think that the manifesto helped bring those kind of practices to light. I think the idea of iterations was not commonly done, and it is now. So I think it's had a big impact, but I don't think there are many people in the world that are actually doing, quote, agile, whatever that means. They're mostly
the values that were on that first page have permeated many across the industry in a wide way, even though most people aren't practicing agile. No,
I don't think so. I don't think so.
We still have work to do. To get...
I don't think it would work. I think that particular time has passed, and I think that fundamentally, I think people are so stressed at the moment. The complexity of writing software has become so great that honestly, thinking about what you do is such a low priority, right? Because I have a deadline, damn it, and that's what I'm going to work on. So I think we've kind of missed that particular boat. I hate to say it. I think what we have to do, if we're going to actually make a difference to the industry right now, is we need to find a way to give developers some agency and to give them some breathing room to be able to think about what they're doing.
I think we're running into the problems of industrial age management, which we're still stuck in. And still, you've got these ideas that, we can have scientific management. And so they're looking for a formula, and you're saying, we should give developers room to think. Developers are more like artists, and they need that kind of space. And I think that's probably why
between
Agile got chewed up.
But think about it. Yeah, you're absolutely right, because what Agile was a reaction to was exactly that, the scientific management, because the 1990s, as you are well aware, was a disaster when it came to software development, right? I mean, we were inventing processes like RUP and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we were only delivering one project in 6 successfully. And the response to that was to try to add more process. Clearly, the process isn't working. Let's get some more, And the Agile movement managed it harder. Exactly. Yeah. And so the Agile movement was a response against that. Jessica Kerr has a very nice talk. She talks about organizations tend to be self-healing. And so if you try to disrupt an organization, it will find a way, not necessarily deliberately, right? But just by its nature, they find a way to reject it, right? They have really, really strong antibodies when it comes to, novel. And so it took them a while, but they found a way to go back to the area they're comfortable with. There was a good talk. Actually, I think it was at that same conference, that Dev2Net conference we were at. Ken Cousins said that one of the things you got to remember is that the managers who manage software projects, this is probably their first management role, right? They're the most junior of the managers. And they have been told not to screw up. They've been told, you have to have, here's your 6-month or yearly target. This is what you have to deliver. And, do what your boss tells you to do. And so there is no room in their way of thinking of, hey, yeah, let's experiment, right? That's just not going to happen. And so Agile just gets, turned into a set of checklists. And then, that's it.
All the things that we started with that capture like the joy of programming, the poet that we want to be, and the journey that we want to go on as developers. There's no time and space for that.
Not in a command and control hierarchy, yeah.
So, but that's the tension, right? Is like the desire from organizations for predictable outputs, and then the desire for developers to have joy in what we do.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, even if joy developers were prepared to be miserable and slugging and just following instructions people, it wouldn't work, because we don't know how to write software. There is no one way to deliver against a requirement. And you know what? Even if we could, it would be wrong because requirements are wrong, you know? So what they want is not achievable. And so I think what we need to do is to rekindle the spirit that led to Snowbird in a different way. I think we need to think about how can we empower developers to effectively say no. And the problem doing that is that developers don't want to do that. Developers, first of all, there's a whole bunch of developers who are keeping their heads down right now because obviously the job market is getting a bit scary. But there's also people are substituting novelty for satisfaction. So I can't do my experimenting and my explorations the way I want to. But I can suggest that we switch from React to Next on the next project, you know?
Yeah.
And so we are looking at ecosystems that are cancerously evolving, you know? And developers, and basically they're all trying to out-feature each other. And developers are kind of falling for the hype, you know? So some influencer somewhere says, oh, but you know what? The next model is so much better when you use it with this, or, you know, oh, okay, so I have to try that next because obviously that's what the cool kids are using. And then they're off to do that, you know?
Haven't we always fallen for the hype, though?
A little bit, but it hasn't been, okay, it's exactly the same as the problem that's affecting society with social media, right? We haven't had the ability for idiots to transmit their beliefs quite as easily as we have now. So did you know, okay, if you install a React project, guess how many dependencies you bring along?
10,000?
No, it's 800 direct ones, yeah? 800. So let's say conservatively that's 10,000 developers who had their fingers in your particular app. Any one of those developers could subvert your application either deliberately or accidentally. And if you think about it that way, it should give you nightmares.
800 points of failure.
Well, 10,000 points of failure.
10,000, yeah.
Yeah. And that's why, like, I mean, I wrote a bunch of JavaScript, you know, over the years. If I come back to a JavaScript project after a year,
no chance
it
builds.
it takes me, it'll take me a week to get the thing working again.
You talked about the values in the Agile Manifesto. Would you say that there are explicit or implicit values from the pragmatic programmer?
Wow. Yes, I think there probably are. I think some of them are explicit. So one of the things we harp on quite often in that book is the idea that you are responsible for your own development, and that there are things you have to do proactively to develop as a developer, you know. And so that's definitely a value that we bring out. We don't say this is a value, but I mean, it's pretty clear it is one. There is also...
we value growing and experimenting and having time to explore and learn and sort of stuff.
Right. But I think the other thing about the true values is that they are, in a way, kind of unit vectors that span a space, you know? So they should be relatively orthogonal and they should be generative. And I think the manifesto ones, they're not bad. I mean, there is a bit of overlap. But in the pragmatic programmer, it's not that structured in that way. So I wouldn't necessarily call a lot of the stuff values as much as practices, but they're not specific.
But likely those practices stem from some values.
That
You
absolutely.
have,
yeah,
but maybe
exactly.
hard to get to the core of what those values actually are.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly one of the implicit values which we try to get across we never actually, well, I think we do actually say it once, is that it can be fun, And so the tone of the book, we try to be relatively light. We have the occasional joke. We're a little bit flippant. And it's kind of like to say, you should have confidence to be happy, because that's important. This job is an incredibly demanding job in a certain way. It is phenomenally stressful, or it can be. And you always feel there's a lot riding on what you do. And in that environment, if you're not enjoying yourself, you're driving yourself to an early grave, So that's a value that we try to express. And I think also the idea that it's okay not to know is an important value.
Yeah. That learning from failure that we started with.
Yeah. What about you talked about architecture in the book too.
Yeah.
What's your perspective now on just how to capture architecture? Like some people recommend architecture design records, that sort of thing.
So I think there are two separate questions there. Mm-hmm. One is, how do you think about architecture? And then the second one is, how do you describe it? Describing it, I don't know. I have not bothered to keep up on all the various trends and tools and everything else for describing architecture. Thinking about architecture, though, I think you can actually take a relatively agile approach if you want to. I think that a lot of people, when they start a project, decide, okay, I need an architecture. So I'm going to use microservices. I'm going to use this guy's the bus, and this guy's the store, and this guy's the cache, and all this kind of stuff. Or I'm going to go monolith, or whatever the current trend is. But another approach is to say, this is LeCamp Beck, do the simplest thing, right? Mm-hmm. Is don't even think about architecture up front, at least initially, and produce a straw man. And say, before you even worry about, how many servers I'm going to have and how I'm going to have my distributed transactions, maybe just say, is this what you want? And let that drive the process for a while. And then say, okay, is this an application where I risk suddenly increasing the number of users by 2 orders of magnitude overnight? Now, back in the day, that would be a Slashdot or something like that, or it could be going viral on the socials. But the reality is 99.999% of software that's ever developed today has a pretty static set of users and doesn't grow at that kind of rate. So you don't have to make all of those scaling architecture decisions from day one, right? Instead, you should be doing what you're doing anyway, which is as you're developing the code, you need to be thinking about how isolated I can make things. Mm. And that's just good practice,
Right.
Because if I make things isolated enough, then I can split them if I need to, or not if I need to.
What if you, like I've encountered sometimes people who have certain assumptions about what a system needs to do, and they're not, they're pretty tied to that idea, and yet when you look at the system, you go, oh, you're assuming that you're going to have a problem when, say, events happen every second or something like that, and you're worried about throughput. It's like, I don't know, how do you, it's more than a communication problem, because maybe someone has this hard and fast assumption based on past experience or whatever, and they're certain that it's this way.
Why is it your job to tell them they're wrong?
Feels good.
I'm sorry, that was came across as slightly more aggressive. I didn't mean to be aggressive.
You're right. No, that's a good question. That's like, yeah, shift the perspective. Why why do I need to tell them that it's wrong? I guess rather than, well, okay, let's put together your straw man and then we can actually see what the timing is like.
I think that the thing there is, if they ask you for advice, then you give your advice. If they choose not to listen to it, then you shrug, collect your check, and move on. You know, I don't think fundamentally changing people's minds about religious issues is an unwinnable game. You know, and even if it turns out you were right and they acknowledge you were right, they will find a way of expressing it that means that, you know, well, their way was the right way. So I don't think it's I've given up telling people what to do because A, I never know anyway, you know, and B, it is a pointless exercise, partly because you can't change people's minds, and partly for the first cause, because you don't necessarily know everything there is to know about their environment. And so you can make assumptions that, you know, in the past, I have seen this work for 27 clients. Well, they may be the 28th where it doesn't, you know? So to some extent, you know, telling people what to do is just as bad as people demanding to do the wrong thing.
Whereas maybe it would be useful to say, okay, let's list what our assumptions are, capture our assumptions.
Yeah.
And then
that's a reasonable thing to say.
Communicate about it.
Yeah. And also, I think maybe to look at the associated costs in a kind of like, you know, back of the envelope kind of way.
Mm.
You know, you say you want multi-region redundancy, okay, and that's going to add $1 million to the software budget, and it's going to add $200,000 a year to the run costs. Okay, what does it cost you if your hosting region goes down for 4 hours? If it costs you 10% of those extra costs, which you probably wouldn't do, then why are you spending that extra money? Right? Just accept the fact you might go down. I mean, capacity is different. If you've got like, you know, Black Friday sales and stuff and your volume goes up by a factor of 4, then okay, plan for a volume of 4. I think so much is done nowadays just because if Netflix does it, it must be good, you know? And that's just, yeah, if you're running Netflix, it's good, you know, but if you're running a website for your parents, then it's probably not necessary. How long have you been an opinionated idiot? Should be on my list.
How long has that been?
Oh, forever.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I think I've got a year on Uber. So.
Let's see. No, I think we've covered. Okay. Yeah. Oh. Well, I don't know. I think this was just an observation that I captured when I was reading the book. The idea that the most important job of a programmer is helping people understand what they want. I think you and Andy said that somewhere in the book.
If not, we should have done. So let's assume we did. Just because it sounds good.
Yeah.
Do you have the Mythical Man Month? We'll have to look up the
I might
statements about what a programmer is. You don't have to grab it now. I'm just curious if that would be captured in one of those.
Yeah, but I think so.
I see it.
I think there are two kinds of programming. There is what you could call artistic programming. Where
artistic or autistic?
With an R.
R, yeah.
Where you're trying to scratch an itch that you have. You know, you want to play, you want to explore, you want to do whatever you do. In that case, to some extent, what you're doing is trying to discover your own need. Yeah. The second kind of programming is where you're doing it for somebody else. And most people, well, what makes programmers different, I think, is that they have a different way of looking at a problem and of breaking a problem down or something like that. And most, quote, customers who will come to you and say, I need this, are probably instead saying, I want this, not I need this. And part of the job of a good programmer is to say, okay, I understand that. Now, can we talk about why you say you need that? All right, what is it you actually want to achieve? My favorite question is, once we've delivered the system that does this, in what way does your life improve? Yeah. And that will tell you what their need is as opposed to what they think it is, you know? And I think that's the most valuable contribution. No, that's not true. That's not fair. I think, though, that is one of the most valuable contributions that starting a software project is because it makes you look at what you actually really, really need, and not just some fantasy that Bob's doing this, so I should do it too. And that also plays into the idea of looking at the world iteratively and not looking at big bang deliveries. It's happened to me many times in the past, back when I had like my own consulting business and stuff, that I would deal with a client and I would say, okay, we got two choices here. You have, say it's a 6-month project, right? So you say that you want me to give you a requirements document and then a functional spec and then go away and write the code. And I said, I could do that. And I will probably end up charging you this much. But I don't think either of us actually know what you want and what's useful and not. So instead, what I'd like you to do is pay me for 2 months, 3 months to get enough infrastructure and what you think is the most valuable part of that functionality up and running, right? And all the bells and whistles will leave to the end, but I want you to have a look at this and kick the tires. And the number of times I've gotten to the end of that 2 or 3 months and delivered something and the customer said, oh, that's what I asked you for. That's actually not what I want, And so we'd iterate around that. And a couple of times the customer said, yeah, you know what? That gives me 80% of the value for 50% of the cost. I think we'll stop, which didn't do much good for me, but actually in terms of the customer, it was actually a good deal. So I think in that way, I think one of our prime jobs, if we don't understand what they need, then what the hell are we doing coding it?
So one of the examples that I keep going back to when I think about, the progress of software development is we have a little bookstore here in town, and they use antiquated software. They would use newer software, but nobody's making it for little bookstores because it doesn't, the cost benefit isn't there for them to develop it. And I think, oh, well, as we get more powerful tools like AI support, there's a ton of problems out there that aren't being solved because they're too expensive to solve. And this is an example of one. But then I was talking about this to somebody there, and I realized, okay, so yeah, AI could help one person develop this software for a reasonable cost and make it worthwhile. But you could also just have like cameras around the room and connect it to the AI and say, oh, I'm unpacking this book and I'm putting it here. And the AI knows where it is. In other words, just kind of skip the whole process of writing customized software.
Mm-hmm.
Is what you're saying is that maybe humans are not great business analysts, or maybe not all developers are good
well
business analysts?
There's that, but there's also just my thinking initially that, oh, well, we'll write a program to do that, versus, wait a minute, if the AI can see the books and know where you put them and know how much they cost, and a customer comes in and says, I want this book, and it says, well, it's right over there, and here, check you out and all that. Do you need to, how much custom software do you need to write? And maybe you do still need to write it because it's expensive to run AIs. Maybe the cost wouldn't justify the amount of nuclear reactors we have to restart to run our AIs wouldn't justify that. I don't know. I'm just throwing this out there as
But the
Thought
other
experiment.
issue that is I don't know what the current figures are, but it used to be the case that well over 50% of the cost of software occurred post installation. So in the environment where your bookseller can say to Claude, "Hey, write me some software for my stock control or whatever it is," and it produces software which miraculously actually does kind of work. Who's going to maintain that? And who's going to keep it running? And who's going to handle my machine just crashed, so I have to reinstall it, but now I have to run it on, Python 4, not Python 3. And of course, the history of Python means that's totally incompatible. All those kind of issues seem to be quietly forgotten, when we're talking about this.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that you don't ask the AI to write software. You just say,
Yeah,
here's the book.
Right.
Here's the book. Keep track of it. Which is all the customer really, the bookstore really wants is keep track of the books, or any store, the products. Keep track of the products. That's all we want to do.
But you know what? I wonder if what's the value of a small bookstore?
Oh, it's the people like to come into it. It's the satisfaction. It's the feel that they get.
Right.
Because
And so if you are the owner of a small bookstore, my guess would be that you actually get a lot of tacit information from actually handling the books and shelving them yourself. And when customers come in and say, I'm after a book on whitewater rafting, then you'll know, well, there's a couple over there in travel, and there's a couple over there in venture, and a couple over there in, whatever, as opposed to doing some keyword search,
Well, the people, I think, are still going to be essential because that's what the customer wants. Is they want, oh, have you read this book? Can you make recommendations? But
Right.
the drudgery of keeping track of where they are and checking them out and everything will allow, that's taken away so that the people who work there can be more about the interactions.
Yeah, and you know what? That is the mistake. I'm sounding like I'm being really critical. I'm not trying to be, but I'm talking from my personal experience here. I have many, many, many times. My wife does a whole bunch of nonprofits, charity kind of stuff, and the number of times I have stepped in with some automation and have produced really quite elegant systems that totally miss the point. Because quite often
automation took away the fun part.
The automation took away the fun part, but it also took away the touch points.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, your bookseller, possibly while shelving a book, will suddenly come across a book they'd forgotten about next to the one they just shelved. And so a customer will come in and say, what do you got on this? And they go, oh, you know what? I don't have exactly, but I do have that book. I just remembered over here. And they would possibly lose that. I don't know. I mean, I've never been a bookseller, but I think we have to be very careful when we assess need to think of the context in which that need exists,
And determine what are the things that we gain value by automating and what are the places that automation actually can reduce value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question is what actually is value.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, we learned that with cryptocurrency. Well, some of us learned it from cryptocurrency. It's like, oh, wait, if there's no there, there's nothing to.
We did learn what the value of cryptocurrency is that you can make money.
Yeah, which is the goal of capitalism.
But I think, again, cryptocurrency is a really interesting example because most of the current models of cryptocurrency generation involve how much real money and resources are you prepared to waste, And so here in Texas, we have power plants or substations that are wired into warehouses just to do cryptocurrency. Okay. Why instead could we not have that mining process producing value as well? Why can't we be doing protein folding or one of 1,000 different things which are computationally expensive and therefore not easy to duplicate, but actually have a real result at the end of it, as opposed to trying to factor some ridiculously large number. So, I think, again, it's a question of looking at the need rather than the implementation, looking at the value, not the implementation.
Yeah. Well, I've been studying nonviolent communication for a dozen years. I'm preparing to go to another workshop. I think I come away from that realizing that the most valuable thing that you discover in that process is what are your needs. Because once you know what those are, you can make decisions based on understanding your needs. And it's not something most people are aware of, I think. But it's it's incredibly valuable to understand what your needs are.
And to understand that it's okay to have needs.
Well, yes, as a precursor, absolutely. To see, yeah, but that is a thing that it's our culture is not necessarily supportive of. So, yeah, and I think when you're dealing with a client or someone who wants a software system, to get down to what their actual needs are is the essence of it. And maybe AI systems will be able to help do that. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I think I don't know about you, but one of my main uses of AI is to ask it stupid questions.
Oh, it's great for that, because you realize, oh, I'm afraid to ask this because I'm going to look stupid, even though I've gotten used to asking what seem like stupid questions. And then there's these baseline stupid questions. Oh, I don't know how this thing works at all. And it really does seem like a stupid question. And you can learn so much from that.
And it doesn't make you feel dumb.
No, it does not. No, it has no judgment.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, usually it's often complimentary. Like that's a great question. Bruce.
Right. Yeah. It can recognize what you somehow hesitate about asking. But yeah.
Well, even it's not necessarily just asking something that you are afraid to ask a person. It's almost inviting it to generate fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I find is that, if I ask it, like, how would a unicorn write Java or something, and it'll come back with some whatever, but I don't care, because it may well be somewhere in there is a concept or a sentence that triggers a neuron somewhere, and acts as a kind of seed from which some idea can grow.
Oh, we had, while we were driving to the conference that we ran into each other at, James fed our entire book into an AI, and it generated a podcast with these two totally real sounding people talking about it. And I woke up a morning or two later realizing that they had synthesized an idea that I thought was really good. I mean, you've heard the idea probably of a monad is like a burrito, which is like such a useless analogy. Well, they came up with this idea of a bento box, the little Japanese thing. And I go, that's a good
as
analogy.
A metaphor for effects.
As a metaphor for what you're
totally imagine.
Yeah. And it's like it can come up with different, but even I think even realizing that, oh, I haven't figured out the right question to ask.
Right.
Is so valuable, because if you're talking with the person, you get distracted and everything. But with the AI, you can go, oh, that isn't I'm not going in the right direction. And figuring out what the question is essentially the same as, discovering what your needs are for this project. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time to get there sometimes.
Of course, it's ironic that we're dealing with technology that's designed to, come up with plausible answers in order to be able to actually help us come up with the plausible questions. But
It is. To even learn how to ask questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this was a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, super fun to chat with you. So
thank you with you guys, and I really appreciate you decorating your room to match my shirt. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Oh yeah, it does. Yeah. No, all right. Well, thanks for the discussion.
Well, thanks to both of you. It was really fun.